Hi, welcome to the Essential Ingredient Paran, and welcome to our second video of our pastry series. Today I'm going to be showing you a really versatile sweet pastry, and I'm going to be making two different tarts out of it. The first one will be a French galette, and the second one is going to be a traditional Italian crostata. Okay, we have 450 grams of plain flour, 50 grams of spelt flour. This just adds a nice nuttiness to your pastry. I have 200 grams of caster sugar, a good pinch of salt. I'm going to put in the zest of a lemon. You can use orange as well if you want to, depending on what you're going to be doing with your pastry. And 200 grams of diced cold butter from the fridge. Very important that it's cold, because we want to blend this now until it resembles breadcrumbs. Okay, so as you can see, all our butter's blended through our flour, so it looks a little bit like breadcrumbs. Now I'm going to add 5 egg yolks. You just want to blend these so it just comes together. We don't want to overwork our pastry. Okay, we're going to turn our dough out on the bench, and we're just going to bring it together. We don't want to knead it. We're just going to bring it all together. And just not overwork it too much. Otherwise your dough will end up going a little bit tough. You won't end up with a nice crispy dough. Okay, it's looking good. Now I'm going to wrap this up in some Glad wrap. Okay, so now I'm going to let this rest for at least 2 hours in the fridge, and it can also be made in advance 2 days ahead. Okay, I've got a third of my sweet pastry here, and we're going to make a galette with this, which is basically a free-forming tart. So you don't need any tart shell for this, you just need a baking tray. So I've floured my bench, and we're just going to gently push down on the pastry and just start gently rolling it out. It is quite short, this pastry, so you just need to be a little bit gentle with it, and don't handle it too much, because you don't want it to get too hot, otherwise it'll just start falling apart. So we want it to be about 4 to 5 millimeters when you roll it, and it needs to be a little bit bigger than what the base is going to be, because we need a little bit of a lip to create the edge on our tart. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is rustic and free-forming. So as long as it fits on your tray. Okay. So I've got a tray here with some greaseproof paper on it. So I'm going to gently lift up my pastry and pop it straight on the tray. And then what I have here is, I'm using today cherries and blackberries we have a mixture of lemon zest, lemon juice, sugar and corn flour. You can use any fruit you like, anything that's in season, anything that's frozen. So using a slotted spoon, because I won't need all that juice. You can thicken this up later if you want to for a sauce for your tart. I'm going to pop that in the middle. You want to leave at least 4 to 5 centimeters of your tart, because we're going to fold that over. And you can have a little bit of juice, because that will thicken with the corn flour in it. You don't want your tart too dry. If you find the edges, some of the edges are a little bit too long or too big, you can always just break them off. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fold this over, because what that's doing now is creating the edge of the tart. So you want to try and work fairly quickly. You don't want your pastry to heat up too much. So we've folded that over. So what that's doing is just capturing all those juices in there as well. If a little bit spills out the side, it doesn't matter. It adds to the texture of the tart. Now I'm just taking a little bit of egg wash. I'm going to egg wash around the edges of this just to give it a nice bit of colour in the oven. I've preheated my oven to 180 degrees. And we're going to bake this for 20 minutes. I'm going to pop a little bit of demerara sugar on around the edge, and this just gives it a nice little effect and just adds to the crust of the pastry. We do have the spelt flour in this pastry, as you remember, and this just adds a little bit of nuttiness as well. Some nice different textures going on there to complement each other. Okay, for our second tart, I'm taking the other 2/3 of our pastry and I'm going to cut that in half, because I need one half for the base and the other half I'm going to use to make a lattice on top. So this is called a crostata, which basically in Italian means tart. And today I'm doing with a jam filling and the lattice on top, which is a fairly classic Italian tart. So we're going to roll out our base. So just lightly flouring your bench. Again, being a sweet pastry, it can be a little bit sticky, so you just need to be careful and gentle. You don't want to handle it too much, otherwise it'll get too hot and too soft. We're going to cut out a circle using the base of the tart. So what I want to do is just measure this so that we have just a little bit on the outside. So I'm just going to cut around that because we want to create a small lip on the edge of the tart for our jam to sit. This is not a thick tart, this is quite thin. So I'll put my base back in here. Then what I'm going to do is pop that in there, and then we're going to gently press it into the sides of your tart. I'm using a fluted tart shell just because it adds a little bit to the appearance of the tart. So I'm going to push the sides, and as you can see, the sides just gently come up. Doesn't have to be perfect, this is not. If you find some parts of it are a little bit shallow, what you can do is just cut a little bit of pastry and just create a bit of extra lift there and just push it in. You don't want to come up all the way up the sides because we're not going to add that much jam to it, otherwise it'll be too sweet. Okay, there's our tart shell. So now I'm going to take some apricot jam. I'm just going to spoon this in. You can use any flavoured jam you like, be bought or homemade, that's your preference. Use what's in season. And we're just going to cover the base. This will set even more in the oven when you've baked it, so it won't be runny. Okay, now we're going to make our lattice. So I'm just moving this out of the way. What we're going to do is take the second part of our pastry and we're going to roll it out about the same thickness as the first. So that's probably around the same size as the base of the tart, a little bit bigger. And then you can either use a knife or a pastry cutter or a pizza cutter. And we're just going to cut strips, maybe about 1 centimetre in thickness. Okay, I've got 12 strips there, so that'll be enough. So now what we do, taking our strips, we start in the middle first, and then you cut the pastry off just using the edge of your tart shell, like so. And what I'm going to do, before I do the rest of them, I'm going to place 5 this way, and then we're going to go 5 the other way, but we're going to go over, under, and over, under, creating that lattice effect. So just gently lift it up. And you want to do this fairly efficiently because you don't want your pastry going soft. And then just using the edge of your tart shell, I'm going to break all that pastry off so that we're left with a nice clean edge. I'm going to push it down a little bit because we don't need it up that high, and that adds to the lip of our pastry tart. So using our egg wash, just glaze the top of the pastry strips. Don't use too much egg wash. You don't want it dribbling onto the jam and ending up with scrambled eggs. And sprinkle a little bit of sugar. This just adds crunchiness onto your pastry. And that's going in the oven at 180 degrees for 20 minutes. Okay, our 2 sweet tarts have come out of the oven. So I'm just going to dust our galette with a little bit of icing sugar to present it. And then you can just pop that on a tray or a plate. This is our crostata. So I've let it sit for a little bit so it's not so hot, so I'm able to take it out. So we just pop that out onto the bench. You can see how it's not too thick, and they can both be served at room temperature, and the galette can also be served hot.